I have entitled my conference, Sowing Love, Reaping a Culture of Gift, a legacy of St. Josemaría. As we know, as we've heard several times yesterday, the story of Strathmore began in 1957 when Monsignor Gastone Perelli, the apostolic delegate for Eastern and Western Africa, asked St. Josemaría, the founder of Opus Dei, to promote a university with a Catholic spirit here in Kenya. At that time, Kenya was on the road to independence, which was achieved in December of 1963. Two members of Opus Dei arrived in Nairobi in 1958, and in 1961, Strathmore College began. Strathmore was the first interracial school in East Africa, founded on the explicit condition placed by St. Josemaría of being interracial and open to non-Catholics and non-Christians. In 1962, the women of Opus Dei, under the same conditions, founded Kianda College. The same criterion guided the beginnings of Opus Dei in Nigeria and other parts of the African continent. St. Josemaría proclaimed many times, as we heard yesterday, there is only one race, the race of the children of God. And so, we know this story well. This was truly an extraordinary institutional achievement. The laws that were changed and all the obstacles that had to be overcome in order to make this happen, and the reality continues today. It is a true sign of fraternity ahead of its time. But the heart of my reflection today lies in the following. For institutions to flourish and to endure throughout history, they require more than noble ideals and/or solid structures. They need the daily yes of the people within them. Their generosity, their magnanimity, their commitment, their spirit of service, all these qualities in order to bring them to life, to animate them. With this living response, even the greatest institutions not only endure, but become sources of renewal and fruitful, and they yield fruit for many generations. This is the creative tension that runs through history. Structures are necessary, yet a culture of gift is equally vital, and the gift can only be given by a person, and personally. Strathmore and Kianda, which later united to become Strathmore University, and then in the secondary level, primary and secondary level, as Strathmore School and Kianda School, they are not simply monuments to this past vision. They are ongoing invitations. They invite us to actually promote this culture. Every generation of teachers, professors, board members, trustees, students, staff is called to choose anew, to make openness, freedom, and fraternity a lived reality rather than mere words on a mission tab at a website. This is precisely what gives life to be, do, care. And that's why be, do, care begins with the word be, right? It is only by becoming first, by shaping who we are interiorly, that our doing and our caring can bear the depth and consistency needed to sustain a true culture of gift. So today's conference is really about helping us to reflect on how I live the first word, be. How am I being? Sowing is one of Scripture's most striking images of hope. A seed is small, fragile, and easily overlooked. Yet once it enters the earth, it carries hidden power. Jesus tells us in the gospel, a sower went out to sow his seed. And the sower scatters, not sparingly, but abundantly, almost recklessly, if you will, trusting in God for the harvest. So he sows abundantly. He doesn't care where the seed lands, actually. Love works in the same way. Given freely, beyond calculation, it bears fruit because God makes it grow. St. Josemaría saw in the sower's gesture the magnanimity of God himself, and also the way Opus Dei should spread, broadcasting the seed of holiness generously, in all circumstances, abundantly, without distinction, without self-interest. Its message is the universal call to holiness. He calls each and everyone to holiness. He asks each and everyone to love him, young and old, single and married, healthy and sick, learned and unlearned, no matter where they work, no matter what they do. This is from a homily. To sow is to share the love we have received. Each heart won for Christ becomes a new sower, and each small gift, an act of patience, a word of encouragement, a hidden sacrifice, extends the chain. St. John Paul II reminds us, man cannot live without love. He remains a being that is incomprehensible for himself. If love is not revealed to him, if he does not encounter love, if he does not experience it and make it his own, if he does not participate intimately in it, remains incomprehensible. So that means we have to participate, each of us personally, in love. Sowing love is therefore the beginning of a new culture, but it must be done in God's style. Open-handed, trusting, generous. St. John of the Cross captured this when he wrote, "Put love where there is no love, and you will reap love." And this phrase of his was very much beloved by St. Josemaría. Put love where there is no love, and you will reap love. This occurs when we give freely to others, and we thereby create the conditions for a response that is equally free. For a gift ceases to be a gift when it carries an expectation of return. What arises in this dynamic is a kind of spiral of self-giving that is also life-giving, a process whose effects defy quantification. A notable example of this occurred in the United States. I remember in 2011, came out in the front page of the New York Times. It was such an altruistic moment that it merited the attention. It was a kidney donor who donated a kidney for no known reason. He just did it out of the goodness of his heart. And the recipient of the kidney lived. And some family member was so moved by this altruistic gift because his loved one survived that that person decided to give a kidney himself. And the recipient of that one survived, and somebody around him was so moved that they decided to give a kidney. And so on. It was a chain of about 30 kidneys, right? And 60 lives that were all involved, one with another. And the only thing that really began this chain was somebody deciding to give of themselves, as we know is that of children of God, the source of our most profound meaning. From this flows our desire to treat one another as true brothers and sisters of the same Father, sharing the same dignity. And the concrete way to live this identity is through the gift of oneself. By loving and caring for one another. As the prelate of Opus Dei stated at the first Be Do Care conference in Rome, he said, quote, "We are jointly responsible for taking care of the world, establishing relationships founded on charity, justice, and respect, especially overcoming the disease of indifference. Indeed, we are co-responsible for one another's flourishing, as Cardinal Ratzinger explains in his book, Principles of Catholic Theology. Quote, "Man is that strange creature that needs not only physical birth, but also appreciation if he is to subsist. This is the root of what we call hospitality or care. For an individual to accept himself, someone must say to him, 'It is good that you exist.' But it must be said not with words, but with the act of the whole being which we call love. For the form of love is to want the existence of the other and at the same time to make it flourish anew. The key to the I lies in the you. The path to the you passes through the I." Viktor Frankl, the Viennese psychiatrist who was imprisoned at Auschwitz, experienced this love that gave him life when one day he describes a foreman who secretly gave him a piece of bread that he somehow snuck in from his breakfast ration. And he says, "It was far more than the small piece of bread which moved me to tears at the time. It was the human something which this man also gave to me, the word and look which accompanied the gift." So was Viktor Frankl starving in the concentration camp fed by this little piece of bread? Certainly, but not that much. But what gave him life was that human something which accompanied the gift, the look, the word, that breathed life into him. And this is what Cardinal Ratzinger is talking about, this appreciation of one person to another, if we are to not only survive but thrive. If this can occur at the human level, with the advent of Christianity, once Jesus comes into our world, as Ratzinger continues, we not only say to one another, "It is good that you exist," but actually, now that we are children of God, it is necessary that you exist. It is necessary that all of us exist. This is the very root of care. It is not pity or condescension, but the recognition of the other's dignity rooted in the image of God within them. St. Josemaria's legacy is not primarily theoretical, but existential. He began in the church a path of sanctification in ordinary life. To discover God in daily work and encounters transforms how we see others. Everyone deserves love. Everyone deserves justice. Everyone is worthy of our self-giving. This is what we are doing, what you are doing at Be Do Care, reminding each person that their existence is not only good, but necessary, and that in their fragility, they summon forth the best of our humanity. As St. Josemaría so often repeated, you, by your very condition as a Christian, cannot live with your back turned to any concern, to any need of your fellow men. But let's face it, this vision grows in contested soil. There is a few challenges which we all face in this world of ours. Notably, individualism and consumerism. Individualism urges us to cling, hoard, and measure every relationship by profit. Consumerism feeds endless dissatisfaction, making people and societies restless and closed in on themselves. Together, they erode personal and community bonds, leaving the weakest, the sick, the poor, the unborn, the elderly, the migrant, most vulnerable. The result is fragmentation and even aggressiveness, as we end up defending what is mine at all costs. This combination produces what Pope Francis called a throwaway culture. He says, there are those who presume to be able to establish on the basis of utilitarian and functional criteria when a life has value and is worth being lived. Just on functional criteria. If you can produce something, then you can live. If not, you're to be thrown out. Such a mentality can lead to grave violations of the rights of the most vulnerable, to serious injustices and situations of inequality, resulting for the most part from the mindset of profit, efficiency, and success. Everyone is necessary, and that's why no one is to be discarded or thrown out, even the most vulnerable, even the, quote, the most useless to our production of money and consumption. The temptation is to keep these challenges in the abstract, but they are not abstract. They invade the most intimate spaces of life. They fracture family, reduce work to transaction, and erode care for one another. That is why St. Josemaria's legacy speaks with such urgency. And that is why the logic of gift, it's a new logic that we have to enter into, must be replanted precisely where individualism and consumerism wound us most deeply. And so what is the legacy of St. Josemaria? I want to point out 3 areas where this logic of gift can be implanted, because this is where individualism and consumerism also attack. And these 3 key areas, the family, work, and care, are actually essential if we are to thrive as a community. The family is the first school of gift. Here, hidden acts of service, washing dishes, bandaging a wound, ironing clothes for a special family event. These become a daily apprenticeship in love. This is the school of gift. This conviction led St. Josemaria to affirm that marriage is a Christian vocation, a call from God. He says, Christian spouses must be conscious that they are called to sanctify themselves by sanctifying others, that they are called to be apostles, that their first apostolate is in the home. They must understand the supernatural work implied in founding a family, educating children, and radiating Christianity in society, end quote. For many here in Africa, in Kenya, family naturally includes the extended network of cousins, of aunts, uncles, and grandparents. A child does not grow up alone. He or she is carried by a whole community. Grandparents pass on wisdom. Older siblings take responsibility for the younger, and relatives step in where parents struggle. The burdens and joys of one household are shared by all. This lived solidarity springs from belonging to one another and recognizing that we are all children of God. But consumerism undermines all this. By making us forget about God, it detaches sexuality from gift, in essence, reducing it to commodity. Children become either rights or unwanted products. Family life itself is reshaped by domination and self-interest. The antidote is to rediscover complementarity as self-gift. As John Paul II taught, the human person must never be treated by another as the means to an end. The person is a good toward which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. Children, too, therefore, are a gift, not a property. Indeed, they are called here the wealth of the family. In some societies, people think of them as in economic terms, but not here. The wealth of the family really refers to the wealth that they embody, because they embody hope and continuity. In the family, they breathe in love through parents, siblings, and relatives. There, they learn to share and to dialogue, to see themselves as children and siblings, to grasp justice, and to practice both giving and receiving forgiveness. In this way, they discover their own vulnerability and that of others. The family thus becomes the school where attitudes are formed that later shape wider social life. And it all begins with the family. Incidentally, today being the anniversary of the founding of Opus Dei, St. Josemaría learned so many things with his family. He himself, the one who wrote in the way, don't ever eat a meal without offering some sacrifice up. He became famous for that. He had to learn that in the family. And he himself recalls when he didn't want to eat something, he threw it against the wall. And his parents left the stain on the wall for several months so that he would remember, hey, here you got to eat what is given to you, But he learned that in the family. And his message has spread throughout the world, So, whether or not his mother corrected him at that moment made a big difference to all of us and to many people throughout the world. All these things can shape our wider social life. But most importantly, I think forgiveness and reconciliation stand out as essential in a world marked by wounds we inflict on one another. Disputes within families are often resolved through the mediation of elders, teaching that peace is more valuable than pride. This is where reconciliation begins, in the home, in the village, around the family hearth. And it does not remain there. The lessons learned in these small reconciliations ripple outward into society. When families learn to forgive, communities become capable of peace. When forgiveness fails at home, its absence is felt far beyond, feeding cycles of hostility and division. Even as we see today in wars and conflicts that scar entire nations. Thus, forgiveness, learned at home, becomes increasingly vital for our world. Forgiveness is, in fact, the most gratuitous act of all, returning good for evil. As Pope Leo XIV says, true forgiveness does not await repentance, but offers itself first as a free gift, even before it is accepted. So think about it. When I'm insulted by someone, have I already forgiven them even before they ask for repentance? This is what the Pope encourages us to do. And it's something that also St. Josemaría promoted, especially after that very bloody civil war in Spain. Thus, family is not just a private unit. It is the seedbed of a culture of gift for society where every member is necessary and no one should be isolated from others. It is here in these networks of kinship and care that life itself is freely given and therefore grows in meaning only when it is handed on as freely as it was received. As Jesus himself, in fact, teaches, freely you have received, freely give. Or, as the Swahili proverb says, mti hakui bila misisi. Did I say it right? A tree does not grow without roots, reminding us that the gift of life is sustained and passed on within the family and community. The second area where the logic of gift is to flourish, professional work. Work is another privileged field for self-gift. Yet individualism and consumerism distort its meaning from opposite sides. Individualism reduces work to the pursuit of personal gain or treats it as a burden to avoid, cutting it off from solidarity. Consumerism, on the other hand, drives us into workaholism, endless production for endless consumption, while measuring its worth only in material returns. Both leave the person empty because they obscure work's deeper meaning. Far from being mere survival or achievement, work finds its truth in service and collaboration in the common good. To live this, St. Josemaría teaches us we must first work well, diligently, responsibly, and competently, without letting work become an idol that devours family and interior life. But working well and justly, while essential, is not enough. If reduced to contractual compliance alone, work risks being hollowed out, leaving no space for the human and spiritual meaning it is meant to bear. Here, Benedict XVI offers a key insight in his social encyclical Caritas in Veritate, Charity in Truth. Quote, while in the past it was possible to argue that justice had to come first and gratuitousness could follow afterwards, meaning charity, first justice, then charity. First I give you your salary, then I give you the bonus, kind of thing. Today, he says, it is clear that without gratuitousness, there can be no justice in the first place. And so, think about that. Unless we have a worldview where we are going to give each other gifts, and we're going to go the extra mile for each other, there can actually be no justice. Because I'm actually going to start cutting corners, right? What work needs, therefore, is the logic of gift, and not just for it to have the added transcendent dimension of charity, but as Benedict XVI points out, it needs it if it's to remain just and not drift into injustice. This is an incredible insight, really. In St. Josemaria's terms, work is the place where the Christian acts as leaven in the dough, transforming oneself, one's colleagues, and even the task itself into a sacrifice pleasing to God. And in so doing, it also keeps, the Christian also keeps work from corruption. So think about this. If I transform myself and I transform my colleagues, how do I transform my colleagues? Because, I'm attentive at work. I smile at them. There's the bond of friendship that actually becomes the setting in which I can live this justice that is already there. So it's not just cold justice. This insight finds a natural echo here in Africa, where the cultural ethos is captured vividly, as we have heard, in the word Harambee, right? Let us pull together. Harambee is not merely a slogan. It is a way of life in which communities unite their strength to accomplish what no individual could achieve alone, whether it is in building a school, supporting a family in crisis, or ensuring that a wedding or funeral, for instance, is celebrated with dignity. Each person contributes according to their means, and together the whole community rises. Applied to professional life, this principle illuminates the sanctification of work as service and solidarity, as, for instance, think of a doctor who spends extra time with a patient who cannot pay. I met a doctor who would actually get samples. He would ask medical suppliers for samples so that he could try them out, for medicines or whatever. But then he would actually accumulate all those samples and then use them to give them to his clients, his patients who could not pay. That's the logic of gift, right? Going the extra mile, finding a way of providing care for those people who were not able to pay the regular fee. Think of a teacher who mentors a struggling student after class, even though she may not be paid for it. Or an entrepreneur who prioritizes fair wages and family-friendly policies, giving a maternity or paternity leave, even though his company or her company is not going to be as productive as it could have been if, everybody would have been present. All these embody the spirit of Harambe and are seeds of a culture of gift. Thus, work becomes more than a transaction. It becomes a vocation. It ceases to be an idol or an escape and instead becomes participation in God's creative and redemptive love for everyone, not just ourselves. As the family is the school of gifts, so too the workplace becomes a second school where daily work, united in service, teaches us to pull together and to build up society on the firm foundation of self-giving. Finally, care and social charity. Saint Josemaría, in the early days of Opus Dei, sought strength among Madrid's poorest. He says, I went to seek strength in the poorest neighborhoods of Madrid. Hours and hours, back and forth, every day on foot, from one part to another, among the poor who owned absolutely nothing, among children with runny noses and coughing spells, all sickly, but still God's children, still souls that were pleasing to him. And so I went in search of the means to do the work of God in all these places. The sick constituted the human strength of the work. This intuition that caring for the weakest strengthens the giver remains prophetic. Individualism and consumerism hide fragility by idolizing independence. I'm not weak. I don't need you. I don't need anything. Don't give me help. Yet it is precisely in vulnerability that we discover our common humanity. Illness, poverty, and old age are not threats to dignity, but moments when dignity shines most clearly. Care, therefore, is crucial, as it is the human and humanizing response to fragility. But it must be given freely and personally. And this is the point. In fact, care is more than a task. It is a way of relating that acknowledges our human condition. By recognizing our own vulnerability and that of others, we rediscover human interdependence, not independence, but interdependence. This has concrete consequences. For instance, the development of palliative care, assistance to families with dependents, the rise of care-oriented professions and the promotion of their dignity, and a growing appreciation for the spiritual, psychological, and emotional dimensions of life are just some examples that have arisen from people with a mission to care, and in and through their personal witness have inspired and strengthened many of these social charity professions. So they've transformed what began as charity into entire professions which really make a difference in society. When a culture of care and therefore of gift exists, we overcome individualistic perspectives. As Mamen Guitart, a professional dedicated to care, explains, only people know how to care, and we all learn to care when we are cared for. It comes naturally to give what you have received, and it is logical that such attention not be limited to the private sphere of a home or an institution. The culture of care spreads like a cascade, and that is why it ends up impacting the whole of society. A better society should aim to educate people capable of caring. That would amount to an atomic bomb against individualism. The culture of care is so elementary, she continues, so important and so humanizing that it should form part of the strategic lines of any society that aspires to true progress. This, in fact, ought to be the distinctive mission of all the initiatives represented here at Be Do Care. Your projects will certainly solve concrete problems, but if accompanied by persons who discover and are inspired to give of themselves freely to others, they will also shine as a light for society. The state, businesses, families, and communities will look to you, to your priorities, your culture, your attention to each person, and the principles that guide you. It will be a particular light that you will bear, one capable of illuminating all of society with a vision of care rooted in human dignity. Conclusion. After all that we have said here about the culture of gift, about care, about work, about institutions, the question that arises is, what is the first step? What should be our decisive first step? Because it could all just stay in words. The answer, though simple in appearance, is profound. We must begin by listening. By listening. That's the first step. Listening is not merely a technique to be employed. It is an internal disposition of my soul, whereby we freely open our minds and hearts to one another. It is the primordial gesture of care, the foundation of authentic dialogue, and the condition for genuine fraternity. In every act of listening, there are two persons, the one who entrusts and the one who receives. And then they interchange their positions. To listen is to recognize the other not as object but as subject, to regard the other with love, to attend with both the senses and the heart, allowing their reality to shape our response. Without listening, the act of giving becomes distorted. It degenerates into paternalism when we impose our own solutions. So I know what you need, and we don't listen. I give you what I think you need, but I really don't know what you need. Or it devolves into dependency when assistance erodes another's freedom. You know, this is the concept of subsidiarity plays a big part here. The word subsidium in Latin means help. And you can help someone to the point that you substitute their function completely. And that would be bad. So the state says to the family, look, you're not really educating your children well, so we're going to take them from you, and we're going to educate them, and we're going to put them in our schools, whatever, and don't worry about it. You don't need to have families anymore. Just don't worry about it. That's against subsidiarity, right? Subsidiarity says if the lowest instance in the hierarchy of society can do it, they should do it, right? But you cannot help that instance so much so as to squash it. You have to help it so that you make it thrive, and especially an instance such as the family, which is a natural institution. And so you don't want to create this dependency, right, with too much assistance. Or another defect would be projection, right? When what we give reflects our own desires rather than the true needs of the other. In each case, the gift humiliates instead of elevating. Benedict XVI expressed this with precision. If my gift, he says, is not to prove a source of humiliation, it must give to others not only something that is my own, but my very self. I'm not going to give you something, I'm going to give you myself. I must be personally present in my gift. Listening is the safeguard of this personal presence. Here, then, lies our responsibility. Institutions, however noble, may preserve values, embody ideals, and provide opportunities. Yet they run the risk of becoming cold structures unless they are animated by persons who discover and embody the logic of self-giving. And this possibility exists when men and women in their ordinary work and daily relationships begin by embracing listening as a way of life and a guiding principle. Only then will institutions have the real possibility of transcending their functional roles. Schools will be more than classrooms, hospitals more than wards, businesses more than enterprises. They will be able to become places where humanity is renewed, where fraternity flourishes, and where the love of God becomes tangible. The invisible becomes visible. This is the enduring legacy of St. Josemaría, not only to promote institutions such as this one, but to inspire persons, one by one, who by listening and giving of themselves sow love wherever they are until society itself is renewed and transformed into a true culture of gift. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Castillo, for that inspiring and reminding us that we as the human beings are first of all the center, but also very important is the family. I would like to ask Father Chodo, our Pro-Chancellor, to come and help us thank Father Castillo with a gift.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That was a gift being given and received. Very, very kind. Thank you.